Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. So we've heard that from a previous member, Mr. Caston, that ESG influences don't exist. And now we're hearing how it's actually being funded, something that doesn't exist, by, the nefarious fossil fuel industry. So clearly it exists. We've seen it, heck, from community banks that have been told that they're going to put themselves at risk from the SEC, from various government organizations, to if they invest in coal companies, if they provide lines of credit to coal companies, to very large wealth management companies being told that there are ESG requirements that they need to follow, and then being repudiated by the CEOs of these large organizations saying, hey, that's actually against our fiduciary responsibility. So we know it exists, and the question is, how much does it negatively affect investors that aren't aware? We're talking about information, okay? There's a way of persuasion via an undisclosed bias that I think we all are aware of it in today's society, right? So you can be pushed into a particular investment without being told by those that are commanding it, because people do listen to their consultants, especially when it comes to wealth management and other specialized fields. So Mr. Crane, and that's why I find this kind of just a little ridiculous, right? The ESG push exists, and what we want to know is how much of a negative effect does it have, and what sort of teeth does it have, and the legal standing for the pushback, which I believe has occurred, perhaps very successfully, or somewhat successfully over the last couple of years. At least that's the sense I get. So, Mr. Crane, I'd like to just start with you. Would you feel that the pushback that has occurred on this issue by Congress going public, by other companies stating that this is something that's not in their clients' interests, has that tamped down some of the ESG directives that have existed?
So I certainly think it's still an ongoing issue. As I've said, manufacturers are committed to providing appropriate information, material information to their investors. Some of that information may be quote unquote ESG related, but that's very different than this kind of top-down mandate, whether that's from activists, as you indicated, or regulators, that takes away that freedom to make appropriate disclosures that are relevant to the business and the investors therein.
Yeah. And ESG should be a choice for investors, as was brought up about, Apple phones being made by slave labor. Yes, that's information, but that's not being deliberately pushed into one investment over another because of an ideology. Mr. Crane, I also want to ask you about this. I introduced the SEC Review Act to address the lack of transparency and accountability in the no-action process on shareholder proposals. The SEC shouldn't push policies in secret without proper oversight. Do you think the current no-action process for shareholder proposals is functioning effectively, or do you see areas where it has become problematic or even broken?
That's a great question, Congressman. In 2021, as I'm sure you know, the SEC staff issued Staff Legal Bulletin 14L, which essentially forces companies to include on the proxy ballot any shareholder proposal that raises an issue with, quote, broad societal impact, irrespective of whether that issue is in any way relevant to the company. And so what that means is that companies are receiving a flood of increasingly prescriptive, increasingly socially driven policy proposals that are less relevant to their actual operations. And under this new standard, the SEC staff is less likely to grant no action relief because they're complying with this guidance they put out, SLB 14L. So it's clear that that process is broken at the SEC, absolutely.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Doyle, quickly, in your experience, has the rise of ESG initiatives blurred the lines between the fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value and what one might see as a broader moral obligation for companies?
There clearly has blurred the line, and as I mentioned in my statement, it does go back to how people are using ESG and determine whether it is being done to create value as opposed to what might some consider creating values or bringing their values in it. So there's definitely a distinction between those things that needs to be understood at first.
Well said. I ran out of time. Mr.
Sorry,
Chairman, I
the
yield back.
gentleman's
Thank you.
time has expired. With that, the chair is going to recognize the gentleman from Tennessee